Welcome to the Heart of Soul podcast, an exploration of who you are, what you are, and why you are, offering new ways to investigate age-old questions at the heart of you. Greetings, it's Joseph, and thanks so much for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. In today's episode, at long last, we've teased it, we've threatened to do this, we're finally doing it. A 3-part series on soul species begins right now. Surely one of the most fun aspects of Edenity, Stace and I give you descriptions of each soul species along with celebrity examples, so you can begin to identify them yourself, which is exactly how I learned the system. If the only offering from Edenity were soul species and how it impacts how we process reality as human beings, it would be an enormous contribution and change the world radically. But it does take time to study and practice, so I hope you'll spend the energy to do so. It's personally a favorite subject of mine, and I really hope you enjoy it. I remind you, as always, to please listen to this podcast from the beginning and in order. Thanks so much for listening. Greetings and welcome forward, everybody. Happy New Year. It is now, if you're listening, this is a weird thing. We're recording this in 2022 on December 30. But for listeners, it's the next year. So we're like reaching forward in time to talk to people. I guess we do that all the time, but because of the made up boundaries of dates and stuff, it seems special.
Yes, exactly right. Conditioning's a bitch, really.
It really is. Sometimes it's working for you, and sometimes not. Anyway, we're going to talk about soul species today, and I don't know how we're going to do that. As usual, we didn't really prepare anything, but I feel intimidated for some reason. I think I'm concerned, and it's ridiculous, really, but I'm concerned that there's going to be some burden on me to explain something about every single one, because that's what we did in that with Eric's thing, Clubhouse. There was a Clubhouse episode we did, and that recording is available. So there'll be a presentation about soul species there. But yeah, we'll probably talk about that. So where do you want to start with soul species?
Well, let's start at the end of as this podcast being the end of a certain series on creation relational spirituality. Mm-hmm. The difference between creator relational spirituality and creation relational is about the difference between the creation relational, as we've said before, is about specifically focused on our soul's relationship with the divine, and anything else that's not mundane or secular but in soulful domains is part of creation relational domains. And part of that creation relational domain of sainthood that we're talking about, the sainthood dharma, is soul species. People's one of the most favorite topics that people are interested in, because Edenity dares to invite us to consider that there is one unchangeable thing about us. It's about the only thing that's not changeable, or conditionable, or healable, or devolving into darkness and shadow, and that is our soul species. So let's start this by reminding, recapitulating that Edenity solves the East-West divide on spirituality with a very simple, couple of simple patches or linkages, let's say. Mm-hmm. And one of them is that we maintain, and that's something that's self-verifiable at some point, that we are in possession of both a mind eye and a soul eye. Now, if that's true, then that would represent, if the metaphysics all play out soup to nuts, so to speak, it would mean that the East's mind eye being held as an illusion is got some truth to it if we say it's relative to the deeper soul eye, out of which the mind eye is a precipitate. In other words, maybe in the East they've been calling the mind eye an illusion because they sense somewhere that it's not the real thing, and we would say, of course, that, well, it's all things are real, but some things are more real than others. Some things more closer to essence than expression. And that's how we say everything's real, but some things are more real than others. So in that sense, they may have intuited that it's not the whole enchilada at some point, and then said, "Oh well, it's the whole enchilada of notness." That, as we've said in our sagehood conversations, the East summarily says that we cathect or absorb or internalize external experience, and by the ways, strange ways that our central nervous system relates to experience, it creates an illusional I, a sense of I, a mind I, that seems to be the author of experience when it's actually the progeny of experience, as the Buddha taught. But that notwithstanding, if we say that there's a soul I and a mind I, and would agree with the East that the mind I is ephemerally real relative to a deeper soul, ephemeral soul I. Mm-hmm. So if we've got both those going on, and Edenity offers the metaphysics for that, and invites you to consider it, in that sense, we're talking about a real resolution, not revolution, a resolution of Eastern and Western spirituality, because there's truths about both of them. There really is a God. Yes, Virginia, there is. And there really is.
Virginia who?
I guess I'm dating myself. Back in the 40s, around Christmas time, there was a movie that got very famous that said, "Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus." So I'm dating myself with that reference. Yes, Virginia, there is a God, believe it or not. No, in fact, we don't want you to believe it.
Right.
We want you to experience it.
Yeah, experience it or not.
Experience or not, that's right. So today's topic about soul species provides the context for the nature of our soul I. It's behind there, and Edenity offers all three dharmas of personhood, sagehood, and sainthood to be able to access consciously the difference, first of all, between our mind I and its wounding. Secondly, the difference between the mind I and the soul I. And thirdly, the essence and nature of the soul I. So it's a really interesting configuration that's not been offered, as far as I can see, in any other paradigm, past or present. So it really is a new thing that Edenity is offering the planet, as they say at the Oscars, for your consideration.
You mean soul species being new?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Well, there are some models out there that attempt to have an array of soul species. None have as many. Some are actually common to your model. I haven't seen any that have as many, but it exists out there, and I see that as validating to Edenity, that other people's third eyes are picking up at least some of the same thing. And of course, the angel stuff, which we've hinted at before, that's in mythology and is leaked into from the collective unconscious. But one thing I want to piggyback on that you said about Santa Claus, what Santa Claus and God both have in common, that you experience it or you don't.
Yes.
Relative to soul species, my own experience of it and where I came from before, what I brought to Edenity was a decidedly unspiritual self. I came in when you had split the paradigm up into a therapeutic arm and a spiritual arm, and you kept them pretty separate. And lucky for me that you did that, because I might have been really turned off by the spiritual side, because I was very much agnostic, and I got interested in spirituality when I started playing with energy in martial arts. And I figured, well, if I could use this to throw someone on the ground, then it must be real. And I got really good at manipulating energy, and it was like, okay, there must be something to this. But I was not a new agey woo-woo California guy, despite the fact that I lived in California at the time. But what I want to say about this is, so when I started to learn about soul species, it was definitely with a fair amount of skepticism, but a lot of curiosity. And as you've said before, I can somewhat proudly say I'm one of the best soul species identifiers around now, and that's precisely through experimenting with it, not believing it, not
Yes.
believing it.
Yes. Yes.
And I do it a different way than you do, as far as I know. There's
Yes.
certain characteristics and traits that I use my third eye to look for, and some even physical characteristics that I look for.
Yes. Yes.
And it makes me think of, I believe is in China, they have this thing where to determine the sex between different chickens, baby chickens,
Uh-huh.
and it's doing these horrible things. There's a conveyor belt full of hundreds of these chicks. It's like
Yes. I've seen that.
barbaric,
Yeah.
right? And then they have people who are sexing them, discerning the sex to separate them. And the
Mhm.
way they do it is absolutely fascinating. This is a true story. They have someone who knows how to do it, and they have a person do it with them. The new person stands right there and just starts guessing. And when the expert sees that they're doing it wrong, they correct them.
Mhm.
And eventually they just learn how to sex them without any mental distinctions. They just learn the instinct somehow by being corrected again and again and again.
That is amazing. So they're not looking for any morphological
No.
evidence.
Not consciously.
Wow.
Not
Yeah.
consciously. Maybe it's a feel, or maybe they do see something, but they don't talk about it. They're just like, nope, that one was wrong, that one was wrong. And eventually they just get it. So
Wow.
to me, there's something about soul species that, and that's how I learned it, because I was incredibly curious about it. And I would start to, be watching a movie or TV or looking at a magazine or whatever. Like, oh, look at the eyes on this person. That looks like an angel soul. And you go, oh yeah, that's a Gabrielite or whatever. And eventually I started to get a sense of it, just like the chicken thing. And,
oh, nice.
And now we mostly agree on stuff. So
99% of the
yeah.
time.
So I offer this as, you say so often about Edenity that it's self-validating. I just wanted to tell that story because it is self-validating, and you can spot the quote unquote lizard people as you walk through the streets, and
Sure.
just play around with it. It's really fun.
Yeah, I've seen in the last 10 or 15 years, not when we started out, but the last 10 or 15 years, more and more of these soul species models. I know what you mean. I guess what I wanted to say a little more clearly is that we have an ontology and an ontogeny
Oh yeah.
of how they flow, how they were created, and how they apply to everyday physiological and psychological realities.
Yeah, that I've not seen for sure.
Yeah.
Not something
So-
grounded in actual practicality.
Yeah. So again, we're going to examine here something about us that is a noun. I'll say it that way: a noun of our deepest being, our soul species, and there are several adjectives that go along with it. And this is what Joseph has also gotten so good at. We include both the Enneagram point, sometimes an astrological sign,
Mm-hmm.
and also whether or not in EBEs has its own assignation for wounded shadows that are the product of abuse. We call me spacers, and those that are generally the product of neglect, they become what we call we spacers.
And we did an episode, at least a good chunk of it, on that. So if you've been
Yes.
listening in order, you'll
Yes,
remember
as you
that.
should, ladies and gentlemen. So in that sense, I just to spend less than 5 minutes here on the ontogeny and ontology of how soul species happen, because how soul species came to be is directly linked to our old myths of the fall from grace of Adam and Eve, believe it or not.
Yeah.
In that sense, I'll start out at the very beginning, which we said before, so I'll go through it very quickly. Once upon a time, God realized it existed. And then after a little while, it was totally surprised. It woke up to itself. How it woke up to itself, please don't ask me. I've asked it in many different ways as I can. And it really says it doesn't know. It just woke up. So, and there's a perfect moment where we can say divine being is not omniscient. It doesn't know everything. It knows a hell of a lot more than us, but so by comparison, it's omniscient, but not in itself, it's not. So anyway, divine being woke up to itself, and then after a little while realized that there must have been an aspect of it that pre-existed its awareness of itself. In other words, you can't awaken to yourself unless that you existed before you realized you were a being. So in Edenity's jargon, we call the aspect that woke up first as Yangther. We used to call it Maker. I call it Yangther now. It's a little clumsy, but I like it. You can personalize it anyway. It doesn't care what you call it. It really
it's
doesn't.
definitely not what you call it. So there's
No,
that
it's
going for you.
definitely not. So yeah. So that was the Yangther, the yang aspect of God. And then when it realized that there was something that pre-existed its awareness of itself, that aspect, the aspect of divine being that preceded divine being's awareness of itself, is the Yinther aspect of God. In other words, the Yangther aspect segmented in some mysterious way out of its non-realization of its existence to the realization of its existence. And that's a Yangic thing. It segments, it looks at meta. It's more about being, it's more about doing than being. It's about activating rather than responding. That's yang in all of us. And so in that sense, when Yangther woke up to itself and then realized it must have an aspect that pre-existed, it being the awareness of itself, that was divine yin, and the recognition of divine yin in that moment awoke the divine yin. And there's how the yang and yin have been imbued into all of our soul structures, our soul signatures, in the sense that everything, all of yang, secondarily comes out of yin. Now, we've got lots of fractal examples of that, and all the way soaked down to our humanity. And of course, one of them that's really obvious is that both men and women come out of women. There is a big,
which is why men have nipples.
Yeah, it's exactly why we have nipples. We all start out basically. It's a little bit of a stretch to say, but genetically, it's true. We start out with the XX chromosome, and then the Y. One of the X's goes into a Y. So literally, we have nipples because we all start out as female, and this is actually counterintuitively to a lot of people. This is the one of the first things that men as a species who have more yang to them realized was intolerable. And so they had to create the patriarchy to make themselves feel less than women.
Yeah, it's so ironic because in the Christian story, the woman is derivative from Adam's rib, right?
Yes.
But actually it's the other way around. If anybody's derivative, it's men.
Yes.
Yeah. It's so funny.
It is. It's double ironic because the patriarchy men could not bear that, because after all, they had more muscle mass usually and more forceability and to exert their will. So they were survival of the fittest in some way relative to the tenderer gender that didn't usually have as much muscle mass. And so in that way, they had to put down women, exactly showing in that rib thing with Adam and Eve, so that they were the superiors. And in fact, all of it comes out of insecurity. And there's a good reason for it. We have to mate as men, and this is a big point we've made before. I'll just say it cursorily here. Men have to mate with the same gender that they came out of. And that men most of the time spend most of their lives trying to differentiate from the mother to find what they are. If they don't have a strong father present in their life, it's difficult for them to find their own yangness, because they came out of mama and they needed mama. They suckled with mama. How do you break away? What's the process of breaking away from a son breaking away from the mother to learn what a man really feels like inside of themselves? What does it mean to be male? So this is a gigantic a journey. One that what's his name, Iron John.
I knew you were going to say Robert Bly. That's so weird. Yeah. I saw it was weird. I don't know how I knew you were going to talk about him.
Huh. Well, you're a gifted guy. That's all I can say.
Well, I've been working on my third eye because intuition is good to focus on for my soul species. So.
Absolutely, which we'll get to, I hope. Yeah. At least I don't know that we'll finish it in one, but we will definitely finish it in two.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
Oh, one more
so
thing I want to say. Another truth in service with the patriarchy is that yang initiates. So
yes.
there's a
Mhm.
sense of it wants to be
Oh, yes.
first, which
Right,
is another
right.
reason why they saw women as derivative, because they are more responding rather than initiating. But
Yes.
just
So
because you go first doesn't make you essential.
that's exactly right. And the ontology here of how divine being awoke to itself is the basic metaphysic that informs all of yang and yin, that again can be self-verified downline as fractals in so many of our domains, more than men having nipples and etc. So initiating and responding. Initiating is yang, responding is yin. What's also is yang is that that's the yang in men. But since men and women both have yang and yin, it gets a little more complicated, which we won't
Yeah.
go into today. At any rate, once Yangther and Yinther were both awake to themselves, of course, there was best way to say it. They had an urge to merge, so to speak, and wanted to see. It was not preordained or pre-reflected. It was unmindful, and their urge to merge created a third aspect of divine being that we call the Krista these days. And that's the firstborn of divine Yinther and Yangther. And it is we, starting out as soul species, we are all the children of the Krista, the Christ. And this is where the whole thing about Jesus got so screwed up, that they called Jesus the firstborn when Jesus was really, really and truly just a devotee of the Christ, this first child. So they conflated Yeshua and the Christ as one thing, but it was the Krista who was the firstborn, the first child of God, not a son, more patriarchal nonsense. The Krista is equally yang and yin, and in that way, we're all of our souls are children of that Krista. So to make a distinction between the Krista and the Yangther and Yinther is a little arcane, but we can do that, but not today, except to say that it was once the Krista was born, it became, I'll say it another way, became the uterus through which divine Yangther and Yinther's merging all of a sudden started unfolding out of the Krista. The first beingness were angel souls, and the angel souls followed the pattern exactly as you might imagine of the Yangther and Yinther configuration. And this was technically, it's not a big point, but this was technically before this matter-based universe was created. So the first things that fell out of it, since divine being, yin and divine yang were both self-aware, as well as the Krista is self-aware, the first beings that it unfolded through the Krista were the ones that were angel souls characterized by the love dynamic, the love dynamic and community dynamic of the sacred yin. So, because she preceded the Yangther in existence, just not in self-awareness. So it made sense that Yangther being more self-oriented and Yinther being more other-oriented, relational-oriented, this is the way it all sussed out. So the first angel souls were born, and that way we call them Michaelites. And Michael is not a youngic being as all the legends have him as. It's Mikael, and that is a yin being. And all of the angels in the Michaelite kingdom are all yin, 100% yin, taking after our great grandmother, Yinther, right? Mm-hmm. And so this unfolded, and this was delightful.
It's another way in which yin is more essential, that the first souls created were yin. I never thought
exactly
about that
right.
before.
Yes, the first self-aware beings ever made, before it ever got down to us abiding here in the human domain, were Michaelite angels. And Michaelite angels, as we've said before, are what the cultures have called the guardian angels for humanity. So all that legend is actually true. The Michaelites are the angels almost always that are referred to as our guardian angels. They're not actually guarding, they're guiding. It's a small change in spelling, but guarding becomes guiding when you realize there's nothing to guard against. There's no Satan.
And that there's no victimhood.
Oh, I knew you'd throw that one in there.
Yeah.
So once that happened, much to the surprise and delight of divine yin, divine yang, the Krista, and the Michaelites, the next batch of soul species came out, and that is the Gabrielite soul species. And they're all yang, 100% yang, taking after Papa this time. So in that sense, the first two soul species were angel soul species, and the first was yin and the second was yang. As it proceeded to unfold, an interesting, actually at the same time, I checked in on this morning, Joseph. As it was still unfolding, the Michaelites and the Gabrielites, being 100% yin and 100% yang, respectively, then recapitulated the urge to merge that was originally with Yinther and Yangther, because, well, there's just something about yin drawn to yang and yang drawn to yin that's just unstoppable, because it was seated in the urge to merge between divine yin and divine yang. So they acted that out, and quite happily they acted that out. And while the rest of they unfolded right out of the Krista. And while it was still unfolding, though, there was a lot going on between Michaelites and Gabrielites. And Joseph and I like to, I think it was you who coined the Las Vegas metaphor there, Las Vegas strip. There was a Las Vegas strip right at the overlap border between the Michaelite queendom and the Gabrielite kingdom of angels, where what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and literally that was the case, and one that Joseph himself should be happy about, because what happened, that really did stay in Vegas, stay in that strip, because that strip became home for the progeny of Michaelites and Gabrielites.
It's similar to Vegas. It has this sort of feeling of not really supposed to be there, but somehow trying to be there, trying to be more substantive than it actually is.
Yeah. Yes, but in that sense, they're just as real. They were just secondarily the second thing to come out of Michaelite Gabrielite mating, in whatever way I call that conju connubia. That's the word I got from my memory in the angel kingdom, conju connubia. So their conju connubial activity created what the third soul species, or simultaneously with the next one at the far end, called the Raphaelites. So there's a Michael, who is the archangel of the Michaelites, Gabriel, who is the archangel of the Gabrielites, and there is Raphael, that is a actually, there's two in the Raphaelite kingdom, because one, the most Yangic hungry, let's say, the most Yangic Michaelites drew the least Yangic Gabrielites on that little seam, or that overlap. And so you would imagine that the Raphaelites have both yin and yang contributions to their consciousness. They lean a little more toward the yin, though, because of their stellar and signature imprint, and that is with intuition. And intuition is a little more yin than yang. Yeah. It's not as severe a demarcation as the Gabrielites and Michaelites, because they're children, quote unquote, of two soul species who got around to having some fun. So in that sense, they share a little less stark a distinction, and a little more blend of yin and yang that way. And there is a Yangic Raphaelite, Raphael archangel that heads up the Raphael kingdom with a yin archangel too. Again, a little less demarcated than the Michaelites and Gabrielites. But the point here is that after unfolded the first two soul species, the first two soul species then fractally recapitulate divine beings unfolding, and they just unfolded the Raphaelites. So now we've got three soul species in that sense: Michaelite, Raphaelite, Gabrielite. Each one is each angel kingdom is a little more dense, and this will come out a little in a few minutes here. A little more dense than the one preceding it. Michaelites are the least dense, very yin. Raphaelites are the next least. They're a little more dense than Michaelites, and that shows in their characters and the kinds of qualities they carry and themes. And Gabrielites are at that time were the most dense angel soul species. So for a while there was just the three of them, or whatever a while means in cosmic terms. And so now all of a sudden, not only did Yinther and Yangther have a child, the Krista. Now the Krista had two children, Michaelites and Gabrielite angels, and now they were the grandkids of Yinther and Yangther, and now they evolved into having another soul species. The Raphaelites came, so now they're the great grandchildren of Yin and Yang, Yangther and Yinther. Well, things kept unfolding from there. After the Gabrielites, next came the Luciferites. The Luciferites, and yes, that is the term. You're hearing the root of that right. Luciferites. They were the most dense at that time, soul species, and still are of the angel soul species the most dense. That they came after the Gabrielites and the Michaelites, while at the same time I feel the Raphaelites were being conceived and born and bred, so to speak. Luciferites are like the Raphaelites, are equally yin and yang, but more demarcatively because they're more dense.
Yeah.
So in that sense, Luciferites became the heaviest soul species domain there was. And again, like that, there's a Lucifael, there is a Luadamel and a Lunivael, who are the archangels shared yin and yang of the Lucifer kingdom. So we'll get to this Lucifer thing here in a minute. So now once there was a Lucifael kingdom next to the Gabrielite kingdom, now the most dense Gabrielites, remember the least dense Gabrielites were hanging out with the Michaelites and created Raphaelites, if you follow so far. But the most dense Gabrielites got attracted to the least dense Luciferites. And in that sense, they had their own Las Vegas strip, which is a lot noisier than the very quiet. There's a lot of music in the Raphael kingdom. But it wasn't so loud. Well, I can tell you the playground of the Luciferite and Gabrielite is quite noisy and raucous. And I think there might have been those two angel soul species that might have occasionally become mafia people and created Las Vegas in the end.
Well, Luciferites are notoriously lusty.
Notoriously, you got to keep us strapped down, or else we'll go to town, so to speak. So once the Gabrielites and the Luciferites and those two density arrays started having fun, there was the final and last fifth soul species derived out of this fun, and those are called the Urielites. They have their own characteristics, just like the Luciferites do, but they are a blend of Gabrielite and Luciferite. So they're brainy as hell, Urielites, and on the one side, but they're loving and solo on another because of the density seams that they characterize their species. We'll talk a little more about all the qualities here either today or next time. But I just want to set out the structure first.
And I just want to insert here, so far, all of these archangel groups and the names of them are talked about in other paradigms. They're being in the collective unconscious. I'm pretty sure in Islam, it was said that Muhammad was channeling the angel Gabriel, for example. And these names go all the way back to the Old Testament. I think all of them.
Yes. Uriel also, and right now it escapes me there was a spiritual teacher who was guided by Uriel. I don't remember which one that is. It wasn't Zoroastrianism. It was another one. Anyway,
Mhm.
so now let's recap and move on. We have Yangther, Yinther, the soul species, angel soul species of Michaelite in order of density: Michaelite, Raphaelite, Gabrielite, Urielite, and Lucifilite. So now we've got the 5 angel kingdoms. And there was something really interesting in the unfolding that kept happening. And I want to make the point that the Krista unfolded into an empty, unknown space. It unfolded, and that's what keeps creating or giving space, not creating. The Krista opens up space, cosmic space, you could say, or ethereal space, plasma ethereal space, and then Yinther and Yangther and the Krista, and some unification kind of thing, outspills more the next level of the angel species. That's how it works. So now we've got all there was to existence was these 5 angel species, but something was still interestingly to come, that the Lucifilites, being the most dense, they're the heaviest. Think of a bag of water hanging in a plastic bag. All the weight you can feel goes down with the gravity. It's you feel at the bottom of a plastic bag filled with water. You can pat it on the bottom and it's nice and heavy and squishy. So in that sense, think of the Lucifilite kingdom that way, because the next thing that happened, and now we're coming finally to our soul species content. Just think of a little rip in that or unfolding opening in the bottom of the plastic bag of the Lucifilite kingdom, queendom, angeldom, I call them, because they're combinations, just like the Raphaelites and Urielites. The Krista opened up some space below the Lucifile kingdom, and all of a sudden there came unfolding subsequent soul species that were derivatively excuse me, I have an allergy on top of a cold, folks. Just fun. Want you to know that. Yeah. Never had that before. It's really interesting. So all of a sudden, the Lucifilite kingdom, the bottom fell out of it. And interestingly enough, what happened next actually also leaches down to a lot of our myths. You could call it the Great Flood, so to speak, because at the bottom of the Lucifilite kingdom, where the heaviest Lucifilites abided, there was an opening, and they spilled out. Now, if you think of it now, the Lucifilites are the heaviest, most dense soul species, and as soon as the bottom fell out of their kingdom, the most dense Lucifilites started to fall. Here's where the fall of Lucifer myth comes out of. It wasn't because he thought that his plan for things was better than God's. He wasn't cast in any hell. There was no such thing as Lucifer, the devil. But it carries forward because the one point of truth, say 1 parts out of 100 in this case, is that it was heavier than all the other species of self-awareness that were there at the time, and started unfolding as the rip came at the bottom. They started spilling out. The heaviest Lucifilites started to fall. And then after that, think of it in slow motion. The heaviest are falling, and like water going over a waterfall, it draws down the next level of density of the Luciphiles. Then the next level of density.
Links of a chain.
Yes, with an anchor at the bottom where the heaviest is pulling it down. Each link opens up. Excuse me. And what's happening is the Krista is opening up space for all of these Luciphile angels to sequentially fall relative to their weight. So the Lucifilites that fell first were the heaviest, and they set a template for the first soul species that were not angel soul species. The heaviest Lucifilites set a template until it got to be such a critical mass, they fell another level. And then there was another level that they anchored. as this was happening, believe it or not, the ancestors of all the following soul species were thus Luciferites. And the ones that the myth, the way the myth comes through here, is that Edenity offers that they were the first wandering in the desert basis for how the Judaic tradition were wanderers in the desert. God's favorites, they call themselves, pet favorites, which is nonsense, actually. The divine being could not have any pet favorite whatsoever. That's more mythic nonsense.
Because it's holoarchical rather than hierarchical.
Oh, boy, I heard that somewhere. Excuse me.
Just helping our listeners apply what they've learned from the past.
Yes. So the heaviest the lightest version of the heaviest Luciferites only fell a short way, while the heavier ones in the middle in between kept falling. This was not a fall from grace, it was a rise to existence, right? So the lightest of the heaviest...
because if to call it a fall from grace, as people will about to get in a couple of minutes, would be negativizing this level of being and would be negativizing individual selfhood. I never made that connection. That the frame
by the time it washes, yes, all the way down, that's the fractal, right?
Yeah.
But the next space underneath the Lucifer kingdom that again was anchored by the least heavy Luciferites, that was templated. And once it was templated, well, divine being, Mama, our great grandpa, and the Krista started creating souls. Once it was held by the lightest of the heaviest Luciferites, started unfolding new souls that only lived at that layer, consonant with that particular density factor. And that first soul species that came out of that, anchored by the lightest of the heaviest, is called the Andromedan. The Andromedan, then, after there was anchored, all the Andromedan souls were unfolded by divine being that matched that density level of those lightest of the heaviest Luciferites. Okay, so now we're still rolling. So that's the Andromedan, and we'll go through characteristics after I finish the...
Now, did those Luciferites, in the Andromeda example, did those Luciferites stay Luciferites? They must. They can't change. It's just there was sort of copies made, progeny created based on that level of density?
Progeny is called the Andromedans.
Yeah.
They weren't created by the Lucifer souls there, although that's possible. It's not what I get. It doesn't really matter how.
Yeah.
I should like to know for sure. But divine being unfolded Andromedan souls precisely at that density factor once it's stabilized, right? Mm-hmm. So there's like a gravity here pulling everything downward, but it's actually not downward, it's spiralward, and it will reconnect to itself at the other end, which is really an interesting thing. So the Andromedans were there. Now, because the water was pulling things down, the weight was kept falling, the next level of soul species got stabilized by the next level lightest of the heaviest Luciferites, and that's called the Pleiadian. And I'm going to just kind of wash through it now. That same process kept unfolding until there were 11 other soul species beside angel soul, the 5 angel souls, right? So in that sense, all the rest, the same process occurred. The lightest of the heaviest created the next tier. Krista opened up space for it. Divine being, Mama and Papa, and the Krista got together. That was anchored by next level of Luciferites. Same principle. Now they had Pleiadian souls at that level of density, templated by the next level of the Luciferites. So then now we got Pleiadians. Now I'm just going to go down the road now and just give us what Edenity calls the names. The next level that happened to, we call vegans, not vegans like the current people who don't eat meat, and if they're ovo-lacto, don't eat eggs or dairy either.
Well, vegans, no dairy, no meat, no animal
yes,
products.
That's right. So those are vegans. This is vegan, and we'll get back to that, why some of these names have this names reflect names of stars that we've made up in ourselves. Andromeda, Pleiadian. The Pleiades is a
Pleiades.
star formation. Vegan is actually a star.
Orion is a constellation.
Orion, as we'll get to too.
Yep.
So as the same process unfolded, while the heaviest are still at the leading edge of the fall of the rise, the Arcadians unfolded next, then the Orions, then the Sirians, then the Arcturian, then the Betelgeuse, then the Carpathian, Gephian, who are the lizard people, we'll get back to in a moment, and finally the heaviest luciferites, all by the same process that we just went over, landed in this universe. This universe was created, literally, the spaciousness of it it was to house the heaviest level of density in anywhere in the God field. So he doesn't get it. The buck stops here in the Terran universe. This is the universe that we call the universe that we know. And it's infinite according to astrophysicists, and it's wants to contract from gravity, and it also wants to get bigger with repulsion. And so it's expanding more than it's contracting, apparently. That's only an apparency, though, but we'll get to that later, maybe. So at this point, there finally was a universe to have the heaviest luciferites colonize, and it was opened up in front of them. That universe included planets and energy and matter, and actually also started evolving through lots of interesting carbon, beryllium, or not beryllium, beryllium and helium. Helium and beryllium got together and started creating complex life forms. So the planets became habitable for this, because the universe that was falling ahead of the heaviest luciferites, we were creating a home. Earth is one of those homes, not the only home for luciferites, but the heaviest luciferites landed here in Earth, not another planet in other universes. In this universe, they landed on planet Earth, which is really, I love in English anyway, how the word earth changes to the word heart just by moving the H from the back end to the front end. The first shall be last and the last shall be first. So the luciferites landed in this universe and eventually landed on this planet. And then as soon as that happened, just like it did with all the other soul species, divine being, the triple divine being, got together and created Terran beings commensurate with the density level of the heaviest luciferites. And that's the Terran universe. It's called the Terran universe in other domains. And the youngest soul species are the Terrans. And the Terrans here were templated. The space here was templated by the fattest or the heaviest luciferites. And then they, divine being, made Terrans at that density level. Now, their consciousness, the Terrans, we'll get into it in a moment. So one thing we didn't say, because it's really complicated to try to get this in a short discussion, as the soul species were coagulating and getting new souls commensurate with that density level, there was not a twin, but a sidebar version of each of those soul species that we call, from this point of view, the best way to call it is a devic version of each of these soul species. So there's a devic Orion, a devic Pleiadian, a devic Vegan, a devic Arcadian. They're the softer versions they're a little softer in frequencies, but they share the same characteristics as regular Andromedans, the devic Andromedans, for example. But they're just reflective of a whole other universe of invisible to the occupants of every soul species. In other words, regular Andromedans don't see the devic Andromedans. They live in a different world in the same template, but they're invisible to them, and unless the Andromedans learn how to see them, which they can, just like here. So there's a devic element to a softening, soulful kind of offset to each density level. So we've got devic versions of Andromedan, Pleiadian, Vegan, Arcadian, Orion, Sirian, Arcturian, Betelgeuse, Carpathian, Gefion, and Terran.
I have a question. So when a group of the species is templated by a group of Luciferites, so like for example the Terran, why is it that the Terran or whatever that soul species would be seems so much denser than any average Luciferite? Because Luciferites are way more porous. How do I understand that?
That's a great question. It's because instead of density applying to vibratory structure, it corresponds to consciousness. So the Terrans have the densest consciousness that matches the Luciferites' structural density. So when we say dense, that does not. That's we have that's a bad word. It can be critical, although that person is so dense. Well, this is that would be like saying, oh, that 6-year-old is so dense compared to a high school kid. They just can't get stuff. They just don't know how to understand stuff.
Or that iron is so dense compared to that hydrogen. It's bad.
Exactly. Right. It's not bad. It's just dense. It's who they are. So the Terrans comprise about roughly two-thirds of the souls inhabiting planet Earth right now. But their dense consciousness, they're the ones who populate religions mostly because think of it this way, they're so distal or downstream to the presence of the source, because they're way down in the vibrating way more densely in this domain than divine being is at the source end, right? So their density factor, they can't really feel God, and they're the ones that invented religions.
It's like if you're at the bottom of the ocean, you have to believe in the sunlight because you can't experience it down there.
And there's another golden metaphor by the goldest metaphorist of all, and that's Joseph. So beautiful. They forget the sunlight because it's pretty dark on the bottom of the ocean. So what's really interesting is that they populate mostly here. This is their world. It's a Terran world. So let's finish this structural thing. Mm-hmm. So once that now we've got 5 angel kingdoms. We've got 11 soul species, including all the way down to the Terran, each with their own Devic version of themselves. The Devics of the Terrans are what we call over the years fairies and elves and gnomes and all these beings that tend to flash in and flash out, that some people with third eye activity can see all the time, and others can actually see as forms. Some people who don't have third eye, they'll actually sometimes coagulate into form and come out again. Cats who walk through walls are not our cats here. They're the cat version of the Devic. Devic cats do walk between walls. So in that sense, there's 22 soul species, 11 separate soul species with their Devic counterparts, and 5 angel kingdoms, realms, for a total of 27 different dimensions of soulful self-awareness. Each of these are universes of their own. There's 27 different universes, some enfolded in the others, like the Devics are. But I recently read, I think I mentioned this in another podcast, that some string theory physicist was positing there are 27 different dimensions to this universe. Well, not really, just fractals, because there actually are 27 different dimensions. And these are the dimensions that we experience in between our lifetime, which is what I like to go to next, how this all correlates to actually lived experience, this whole theoretical model. Okay, so if let's say a Pleiadian soul that was born in the Pleiadian, anything more dense, let's say after the whole array was completed, a Pleiadian goes, "Oh, I want to visit Earth," and all the other Pleiadians say, "No, you don't. It's like walking around with 500 Pleiadian tons on your back. It's really heavily gravitational, and the edges are so sharp your soul gets cut." This is how they used to talk about it. But the Pleiadians were far the first soul species, even though they're second down after the Andromedan, acutely interested in the Earth. And we get into that for another reason.
Yeah, they're so sparkly, curious, alive. It makes sense. They're like, oh, it's just a new place. Let's go have an experience there. That's a
Exactly.
Pleiadians love experience.
Oh, they do. And in fact, you can find lots of different Pleiadian related websites on the
Yeah,
internet. And
because they find everything's just so interesting and
yes,
sparkly and experiential, and yeah,
exactly. The
very
Andromedans,
positive.
yes, the Andromedans, even though they're one step less dense, they don't like to come here much. But when they do, they have another interesting way to offset coming to Earth. But we'll get into that in a moment. So I want to make the point here that uh, any soul species, including the angel soul species, because it's all one divine being mansion of being, all of these self-aware souls, from Michaelite to Raphaelite to Gabrielite to Urielite to Luciferite and all the way down to the Terrans, all these soul species, other than the Terrans, can incarnate in this universe, because it all compatibilates, if I can use that silly word, because it's all divine being in form and expression and essence. So if a Pleiadian got all interested and they go to school and they learn about the Terran universe and they see how interesting the Earth is populated by Terrans, I want to go. I want to visit there. And then the teachers will say, well, you have to acquire every of the soul species levels have their own energy body, you could say. In other words, they're in their universes feel as solid as ours does, even though they know they're not solid. There's always a gravitational kind of experience, up and down, side to side, to every one of these dimensions of consciousness. But to do that, a Pleiadian would first have to compress rather than decompress. They have to do compression protocols. First, the Pleiadians have to go down and incarnate a bunch of lifetimes into the Vegan. Then they've got to precipitate a bunch of lifetimes in Arcadian, Orion, Sirian, all the way down. So they get not decompression, but
Well, it's
compression.
like acclimatization for climbing
Yes,
Mount Everest, except instead of getting used to less
yes,
density, it's getting used to more density, which we don't
exactly
really
right.
have any reference for. I mean,
No,
in scuba diving, you have to adjust your ears as you go down a little bit, but it's not the same
sure.
as climbing Everest.
No, it's because this is the densest one, and so it's difficult. There's no good metaphor for going denser from here. Whereas every other level, you can get denser until you hit the buck stops here in the Terran
There
universe.
is a acclimatization for astronauts and test pilots to tolerate greater and greater G force, that's
Oh,
a
oh,
density thing in a
good.
way.
Oh, I never thought of that. That's right, Joseph.
Yeah.
That's good. That's actually a really good metaphor. Oh, and this guy. So, so, um, uh, so any number of these other soul species, including angel souls, can incarnate through and into the Terran universe here on Earth, the Terran universe of which Earth is one planet among billions, and incarnate in the human body, energy body, the vehicle of soul consciousness. Each of the domains has their own vehicle for housing the consciousness. The physical body here, two arms, two legs, bipedal, and that shape is basically the template shape of all the soul species, but has the most dense edges here. So, but because they can incarnate here, even angel souls can live here as humans. So there are angels among us, and as we've said many times, oh, if that's the case, maybe I've met one in my life, and what? Maybe you have. It's possible. The other reaction we get is, oh, I want to be an angel soul. And what we want to be is unchangeable. Is can't really be the case because each of us were born in one of these soul species, and there's the noun we mentioned earlier that can never change. There's adjectives to it like Enneagram point and soul and uh, um,
Spacer type.
astrological sign, et cetera, spacer type, which we'll get to here in this couple series. So angels can be here. And one of the things that I learned after I started to see this array after my non-dual event was that the angel soul species because I'm an angel soul species too. And I use the great metaphor of being a flame spotter, like the rangers that sit on top of their towers and look for forest fires as they just get started, so they can call and help before it gets too big. I acquired an ability to see the soul species of people, and this at first I didn't know what I was looking at, but as I started looking at them, and this is a product of 40 years, not 30 years of looking, it's evened out now at 27. The last one that was added was Arcadian. It was a little blurry between the Orions and the Vegans, but it finally showed up in my consciousness, and then we started seeing them after that. So all of these soul species can incarnate here, and all of the people walking around in human flesh, blood, and bone form are one of these 27. All of them. So we've got about 2/3 of the soul species are a little less than 2/3. I'm thinking these days with the population past 8 billion now. I'm adjusting my numbers from the past a little because it's evolving. Everything's evolving. It's about 55% of the souls on planet now are Terran souls that really were born and made for this world. Another 15% are angel souls, approximately, and anything in between there, between 15 and 55 is what, 40% are all combination of all the rest of the soul species. Earth is being cultivated to house more and more less dense souls, and Terran souls, as they evolve, are also can incarnate in other Earth-like planets in this Terran universe. So the Earth is being cultivated for a preponderance of older, less dense souls, so that the Terrans that do incarnate here have less a time flailing around in the darkness. They can be children of older angelic souls or of less dense souls, and they're educated much more directly into their capacities of being, and don't have to spend as many lifetimes flailing around believing in religion's gods anymore, and actually can accord and begin to resonate with their own souls much sooner.
That's why the denser souls seem to be being held kind of more accountable. Their strategies and ways of doing things don't seem to be working as well. That's why the world is kind of falling apart, and critical thinking is dying out, and pendulum just keeps wildly swinging from one extreme to another. It's driven by the denser folks.
Exactly right. Not working. And not working. A special little thing here to insert at that point that directly connects to what you just said, Joseph, of course, is that the interesting level of the Gephians. Now, the Gephians are what is out there as the lizard people. Some people with third eye actually see lizardy kind of faces on people's. Those are the Gephians, and they're not evil, but wow, they just don't vibrate in love. Their basic vibratory spine is willfulness. That's definite. That's the Gephians. And the Gephians that do incarnate here tend to become shepherds to the sheep. And that's not criticizing the sheep at all of Terrans. They're just the youngest souls. They need tending. That's the way
they power is more important to them than anything else. So that just plays out.
Exactly right. And so you will find that about 80% of world leadership, county in the United States, county leadership,
police,
city,
TSA
urban
agents, judges,
all of these who work with and have authority over Terrans. Not all of them, about 80% of them are Gephians, which is why you see so much corruption in corporate domains and in military domains.
Abuse of power.
Power stuff. All that. And of course, we could name the one who shall not be named. It was a classic Gephian president recently, and is now
not the only Gephian president.
Not the only Gephian president. but certainly now flailing in the same way that you, Joseph, just mentioned about the
Speaking
undermining.
of willfulness, so his tax returns just came out a few weeks ago, and in two of his businesses, I'm sure you read this, I was astonished. Two of his businesses in 1 year, the expenses were the exact dollar amount of the revenue.
No, that's not cooked. No, that wasn't cooked numbers. That's just the
I,
way it
I,
coincidentally
I
happened.
don't understand. Like, even he and his accountants and lawyers must not be that stupid. It's just a flagrant disregard. Like, who would
Yeah.
do that? Who,
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense. If you were gonna cook the books, you wouldn't have to be the same number. It's just such a middle finger of like, come get me. See,
Yeah,
here, I may have
exactly.
lost as much as I made. Come get me. See what you
Exactly.
can do.
No, look, it's perfect. Look, it adds up. It's zero. No taxes for me. I mean, it's absurd. If they were smart, they would have offset it with a little error. The
Why would
numbers
you
would have
do
exactly
that? I
right.
don't. The only reason I can think of, it can't be stupidity. It's just a willful screw you, come get me, see what I can do here thing.
Exactly what that president is
Yeah,
shows through in his personality.
yeah. Like, oh, yeah, I'm
So
lying. What are you gonna do about it? Yeah.
exactly right. Oh, they're so damn willful. They're not
Mm-hmm.
worthless. They're not devils, but their basic function, if you could positify it, is that the children need teachers and leaders,
Yeah.
and so they step forward originally out of kind of a soul service to the Terrans, but their nature willfulness, which creates just you just don't want to visit the Geffian dimension.
In
It's
the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Oh, I wanted to say as a special episode. Speaking of which, this is 42, with
uh,
which is of course
okay.
in Douglas Adams' world was the answer to life, the universe, and everything. 42.
Oh, how
Um,
about that?
yeah. So,
Wow.
but in the Douglas Adams universe, it's the Vogons, which in the movies they depicted they're reptilian and they're
Uh-huh.
extremely controlling and they're the creators of all bureaucracy and you have to
Right.
have the right form and yeah, and there's another great example where the Geffian sort of theme shows
Yes.
up
Oh,
even in this
nice.
fictional universe.
Beautiful. Well, look, in the Geffian universe, it's will against will, survival of the willist, you know. Uh, and so one Geffian soul's will is almost always offset or fought with, struggled with other Geffians' wills, and they sort of sort things all out. But it's just you just don't want to go there. It's like it's in a constant state of friendly war all the time. It's dark and misty and no, my will's stronger than you. No, my will's bigger than yours. Well, when they first started coming service to the Terran, because they're the next youngest souls, they're the second youngest souls created, and they come to the Terran universe here, and let's help them out. But the early ones found there's no other wills of Geffians to stop me here. I can do
uh,
anything I want, and
uh-huh.
then the word got back. One Geffian came first, I guess, or a couple came first, and they didn't want to tell the rest of the Geffians, I'm told, because they wanted the world to
It was
themselves.
like the first humans who discovered iron weapons. They were like, "Why are we hunting and gathering? We just beat those people up and take their shit. This is way
Exactly
better."
right.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly right. So eventually the word got out, and they had to, because after Geffians die here and go forward to their Geffian kingdom. By the way, when you die, you go what's called heaven, or where you go after you die or in between lifetimes, is your soul species home. We'll come back to that later with more definitions. But here they just went crazy because they could their will so they have vision and will in certain ways, but it turned out where they wanted to create everything for themselves and tell themselves secondarily, well, it's good to the for the Terrans to work in our factories, uh,
You know, we're
which is
creating
engine.
jobs and
Oh, we're
providing order.
exactly right, and,
Yeah,
and no, no, we can't let them unionize, though. No, then they're going to have power. We got to keep the unions out, right?
yeah. They don't know
So
what's good for
anyway,
them. We do. I mean, this is what every
exactly.
politician talks about. Yeah,
Exactly right. Self-serving
yeah.
leadership, right? Or all the corruption comes from in every single domain. 99 times out of 100, it's a Geffian in charge somewhere. Not always. There's a couple of
We
diva Gethians.
we have just another story here. We have there's a new Geffian running the post office where I have a PO box, and
Uh,
this literally happened like 5 days before Christmas. My girlfriend was there, and the address for a box that went to our PO box was not like properly. There's some
mhm.
special way it's supposed to be addressed when you get packages there. To make a long story short, so this Geffian had the box in his hand and said, "Well, this wasn't." And she's across the counter. It's 5 days before Christmas. He says, "Well, this wasn't properly addressed, so I need $16 as a fee to like because of the effort it took somehow to get it from A to B." I'm so proud of my girlfriend. She refused to pay it. She's just
Uh-huh.
like, "No, I'm not paying it." He had it in his hand, but he
Yeah.
wanted the $16, and he's been doing other stuff, and I just had to report him because
Uh-huh.
he's turned that post office into his control trip. He's just,
Yeah.
something's probably not going well in his life, and he's just peeing all over the place, so he gets a feeling of control. And this,
Yeah.
by the way, is the reason if you get pulled over by a cop,
Yes.
where there's an 80% chance that they're a Geffian, if you want to
Yes.
get out of the ticket, give them the experience of being in control because that's what they want.
That's what they want.
Just
Exactly.
be sorry, and do whatever they want, and things will go well for you because that's why they're in that job.
I did that. I can attest to that personally. Um, I passed some policeman speeding many years ago, and I knew this already, of course. And so as soon as I saw, I went by going about 80, and there was a really hilly part of the expressway, and so it took them for a while to catch up to me. But I had already pulled over to the side where he couldn't see it. So he was flashing. He went right by me because he thought I was still running away from him. He
Hmm.
saw as he went by, oh, that's the guy. So he did a U-E and pulled up behind me, and he walked up to my park behind me, walked up to the car. He says, "You pulled over." I said, "Well, hell yes, you got me. I was speeding. I was going almost 80. Why were you going so fast? I'm actually late. I'm supposed to meet someone in this town I'm going to. It's my fault. I got no excuses. You got me." And he goes, now the good part of the Geffian kicks in because he
Hmm.
goes, "Well then, sir, be more careful. I want to say I appreciate that you pulled over, so I'm not going to give you a ticket, but please
Hmm.
slow down, sir, please." I'm so thank you so much. I hate paying these tickets. They're expensive even in those days, and so it's exactly what Joseph says here. Give them what they want. Now, your girlfriend wouldn't give him the $16, so she didn't get the package. Is that right?
No, I mean it came from Amazon, so Amazon will probably, yeah. But I thought that was a really interesting moral dilemma, what to do.
Yes.
We talked about it for a while. I was like, and there was a rebellion in her about it.
Right.
I probably would have paid the $16, but you'd have to be there, and
Uh-huh.
with that, yeah, I don't know what I would have done, but
Yeah.
I'm getting that guy in trouble with his superiors for that and other reasons. So
That's
I'm
good.
I'm gonna keep pushing until I get a personal apology from this guy for a couple of things
Um,
he's done.
Now, see, the worst thing a Geffian can do is actually get the hair up off the back of the neck of an angel soul, because an angel soul has dimensions of consciousness that the Geffians just don't have. And if an angel goes against a Geffian, eventually the Geffian's going to lose if the angel has enough patience to see it through. And I know Joseph, and he does. So again, in this sense, the Geffians are not evil. They just went crazy, finding their will had no opposition when they came here. So
Well,
they've
it's
always
like
gravitated.
opening up a soda and all the bubbles have suddenly they've got
Yes.
space to go. The pressure
Oh,
has been released and they
oh,
just go to town. And that's what Geffians are learning. They're because of that they have the ability to dead end their powers everything paradigm. And
right.
everybody's dead ending one paradigm or another, so they're just dead ending that.
Yep.
So they're not to blame, but it's sort of like a mosquito. It's like I get that you're doing your thing, and I'm gonna stop you sometimes.
Yeah. I don't have to like what you're doing,
Yeah.
Same thing with Putin. Putin's a
Hmm.
classic Geffian, and he was,
Hmm.
by the way, Napoleon in a former life, just as short then as he is now. And so, not that that's it. I'm only 5'8" myself, so it's I'm on the short end. But Putin, his desperation with Ukraine is exactly the same kind of thing. He's just trying to push his power. He's got internal fighting against him in his own government, and he just his will is he will not bend. He just because he is the savior of old Mother Russia, and wants to make sure he gets that colonial piece of real estate back to Russia. So he's not bad. He's not evil. He's just Geffian. And so we angel souls, we bemoan Geffians, but they're actually the irritant
Mm.
in the oyster of other soul species to say no to. There's a place for them. Geffians get their power, and just as Joseph's little story shows, they will continue on like robots until they're stopped. And so it only takes groundswell of Terrans and other soul species, a little less dense on the wheel, so to speak, to put them in their place. So it's
Yeah.
actually a yeast.
Yeah, I
Uh,
often think of like the purpose of bullies and narcissists both, and they can be the same, is to help other people find their self authority. They
exactly.
reveal where people's self authority is weak, because
Right.
if you don't stand up to a bully, they'll just bowl over you. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
I've stood up to many bullies in my life, and it's been terrifying for me. But every
Yeah.
time I've done that, it builds more of that self authority, and that's the way we're not victims. Because
Exactly.
if everybody stood in their self authority, the Geffians wouldn't have the power that they have in this world.
That's exactly right. So if you're wondering why the world is such a mess right now, the unification, as we said in other podcasts, of planets Earth, divine aegis of Earth, has gone yin since 2012, not yang. Uh, Geffians are the least yinic soul species in the multiverse, as it's so to speak. Their will is just so yangic, and there are those with less. There are women, quote unquote, female souls. They're just a little less willful than the male souls, and they battle and fight it out, even in their own homes and families, so to speak. So this explains why the our world today is collapsing, because that unification is undermining a lot of the dynamical hold. Geffian's will for corruption and greed and urge to power is collapsing. And a lot of them will overcompensate, like Putin. Okay, they want to flex their muscles. That's being undermined. And in the end, just like everyone thought the T man, the no, the Orange Man might undermine democracy. Not a chance.
Yeah, right.
Uh, in the end, love and light are going to win. It always wins, and then we evolve to the next segment of our sub evolution as a species here as humans, and then it gets a little easier to do it, and then a little easier and a little easier. Sometimes it gets a little harder, but in the end, since we're made of love and light, do your best. Take care of yourselves, protect yourselves as much as you can from Geffian influences and blah, blah, blah. But in the end, be confident. Don't despair. Love and light is our deepest nature, including the Geffians.
Hmm.
And one day, Earth will be a nice piece of real estate for older souls and souls that with grace that can
I
out.
gotta. I want to also reference related to the mythos of the lizard people. Remember the '80s TV show V, The
Oh
Visitors,
yes, yes,
and they remade that like 10 years
yes,
ago,
they did.
and that was based on Geffians, of course. You know, this sort of duplicitous, like we're all friendly and we're here to help, and actually we're wanting to control and
Yeah,
extract resources and all of that.
sure. And of course some great examples here of Geffians, as long as we're on them.
Sure.
A few more: Weinstein, Epstein, Maxwell, Ghislaine, and
Uh huh.
Jeffrey, Harvey, Bill Cosby, who is a funny Geffian. Uh,
Davik.
David Givectian. Yes. When
Yeah.
you find softer, funnier, or gentle Geffians, here's a good example. How do we define the Davic side of the Geffians? They're a little more playful, but they're just as willful. And they lie. They lie. They think their will makes truth, not that there's truth already in
Right.
the
That's
system.
Trump's thing.
Right?
If I say it confidently enough, people will think it's true. Yeah.
Exactly right.
Uh-huh.
So, and that's true of all Geffians, including him. He wants to go on tour again. He's so in denial once he gets out of jail. He wants to go on a comedy tour again.
And
Uh,
on the subject of David Geffs, John Travolta and Tom
yes,
Cruise are both David
yes,
Geffians. The
yeah.
recently late Kirstie Alley was a
Oh,
Geffian.
yes, yes. These are Divic Geffians who get into entertainment mostly.
Yeah.
Weinstein is not a Divic one, though, and neither is Epstein or
Or
Maxwell.
Hugh Hefner was a
Hugh
Geffian.
Hefner, yes, yes. Those were all Geffians can smile like Hefner did to his grave. He smiled. Well, who wouldn't smile if he could get all those bunnies into his little bunny nest, right? So,
Also, Bush Sr. and Jr., Condoleezza
yes,
Rice, Dick Cheney. The
yes,
Republicans tend to be more Geffian. The Democrats tend to be more Carpathian, but
yes.
not necessarily.
Yeah. So we've spent a lot of time here describing my will produces existential truth. That's the byline of Geffians. Carpathians are the next least dense, and they're the more benign world leaders and the benign heads of corporations. Hillary Clinton is a great example of a Carpathian. Bill Clinton too, both of them.
Yeah.
They have their flaws in their will, but it's not nearly as toxic as Geffian willfulness. They want to hedge the truth. They don't say their will determines the truth. They want to hedge the truth. And Clinton's thing, well, I did not have sex with that woman, was technically correct. He wanted to hedge the bet because all it was oral sex, right?
Yeah.
So
What an
you
example.
define it by intercourse. Oh no, I meant it as
Or right,
intercourse.
yeah, that he smoked the weed but didn't inhale it, right?
Right.
Same kind
I
of
mean,
hedging thing. Like, dude.
exactly. Carpathians hedge the truth. They don't
Mm-hmm.
determine the truth.
Mm-hmm.
There's an existential truth that precedes Carpathian's consciousness, but it's not so darkly enforced that way.
I wish
Biden
I could have
also,
been just as a side. I wish I could have been in the room when Clinton and his lawyer came up with that "don't tell him you didn't inhale" position. Like, what the hell are they thinking?
I don't get it. That's as ludicrous as look at the tax returns. They're exactly match my expenses and my outflow. Right? Come on, give me a break. Biden is a Carpathian. Who I was just thinking was a Divic. Oh, Bernie Sanders is a Divic Carpathian.
Yeah,
That's
no,
why
that makes
he's
sense.
the wild man is so crazy in his passionate standing for injustice. He's a Divic, even more heartful. The world looks at him like he's crazy, and he's got more smarts and more a combination of smarts and compassion that get him. I don't agree with every one of his positions, but his heart and his brain are in the same place, and that is really rare to
Yeah.
find in politicians. Right?
Robert Redford is a
Yes,
David Carpathian.
David, exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout all domains, it's not just corporate and entertainment across the board. You've likely, for sure, had a boss. Very likely, and you're sometimes all people out there have had a Geffian boss. You know the kind. They're impossible,
Yeah.
narcissistic, et cetera, et cetera. So Carpathians are much more open-hearted, willful. They want to do good. There is such a thing as good, whereas Geffians say, "Oh no, my will creates the good. My will
Mm.
creates truth." Carpathians, no, much more gentle that way. Uh,
Machiavelli must have been a Geffian.
no, yeah, no Divic adjective to that.
Right,
That
just
guy,
pure
right?
control and power.
Pure control and power. Rasputin
Oh
was a
yeah,
was a Divic
yeah.
Geffian.
He was a
Uh,
mystical one. Yeah, yeah.
Mystical, yeah. You can even in pseudo spiritual domains, you can get a Geffian in there.
Mm-hmm.
The fact the Pope Francis was his name before, or no, Francis is now. Who was the one just before him that's on his last list?
The German guy
Yeah,
Watzberger or something with an
I
R.
forget his last name.
He was
Benedict.
definitely.
Pope Benedict. Because his Pope's name was Benedict.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's a Diva Geffian. Also, you look at his face and you in his eyes, and you see the Geffian there. But Carpathians are benign, good leaders in that way. Just trying to think of any other good examples.
Ratzinger was his German name. Yeah, Joseph
Oh,
Ratzinger.
Ratzinger. Yeah,
But yeah, Pope
right, right.
Benedict, definitely Geffian.
Yes,
I
definitely.
bet you almost every pope's been either Geffian or Carpathian.
Yeah, almost always. And if they are Geffian, they'll be Devic Geffians. So look,
Oprah Winfrey, Geffen or Carpathian? I can't remember. She's on the line,
um,
I think, right?
I'm sorry.
She's sort
What
of
did
on
you?
the line. She's got to be the light
Yeah,
Geffen or a heavy Carpathian.
yeah. I tend these days. She's Carpathian,
Yeah.
not a Devic Carpathian, but a
Mm-hmm.
Carpathian. It's just her upbringing, her conditioning turned her into some of the darker forms that she carries in her, which
Yeah.
people don't see. I saw her live once in taping in Chicago, and there's a different Oprah in between takes, folks. I can
Yeah.
tell you if you're sitting in the audience. Same thing with Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa was a mother to deal with by her staff. She was berative and egotistic with her staff. They all forgave her because they thought her motive completely was for the good of people. But she was a diva carp also,
Mm.
uh, Mother Teresa, sweetly so. Um, so there's some good examples here of how we can if you're going, how do these guys see the soul species of people? Joseph and I were I yield to him on a lot of these domains, and sometimes we'll have a friendly back and forth, and he'll correct me. Sometimes I'll say, "What if it's that instead?" So we're great brothers of the same mother in terms of soul species.
Mm.
Bree is now getting really good at it. Also,
Cool.
Eric is also getting
Yeah.
quite good
Eric
at
Gray's very
it
good at it
by it.
for sure.
And so I'd like to make a special point for making that we've also just started to recognize Urielites, angels, which are so rare to come here. There's another whole story as we get to the soul species. And so, in this sense, what I wanted to offer today was the soul species array, the ontogeny and teleology of it. The ontogeny was divine being, and the teleogeny are the Terrans. In other words, we've just got the whole array, the algorithms that unfolded, responsible for unfolding the array relative to density, and the 27 different dimensions that you can visit any one of the 27 in between lifetimes if you like. If you want to go upward, it's a little harder. You've got to decompress then. In other words, if a Carpathian wants to visit the Orion, they have to do decompression protocols in lifetimes, gradually moving over to the Orion. So all these different soul species can cross-pollinate other soul species dimensions. So right now, it's this wonderful world multiverse of different soul species of different densities, all sourced by it at every moment by divine Yangther, Yinther, the Krista, and all of the progeny that we all carry, the spark of our divine being inside us at the same time we're inside of divine being's God field, right? So, and that's why it's holoarchal and not hierarchical. This array is a holoarchal array, not a hierarchical array. There's bleed throughs possible because the souls can cross-pollinate and take on the energy bodies of any of these particular soul species. There's protocols involved, but a lot of times they go for research, and other times they go for vacation. I myself have a wonderful little house in the mountains, quote unquote, the mountains of the Arcturians, about halfway up, where you get the light on the mountains up in Arcturia. You could see so far as the earthen dimension and all the way up to the Andromedan dimension, just from the Arcturians if you get to the right place at the right time of their year. So I've got a wonderful little chalet up there that I invite friends to when in between lifetimes. One last point about the Luciphilites while we're getting close here. The Luciphilite, if you tracked and grokked this complex array that I spoke probably too fast about all the way through, but there is technically no more Luciphile angel kingdom. I'm a Luciphile angel, and our species seeded all of the other species such that we don't have it. Our kingdom technically is the Andromedans down to the Terrans. That's our soul home, in one way, representation of it, because our Luciphilites templated each of the soul species as it unfolded underneath them, from Andromedan down to Terran. So technically, the whole array from Terran to Andromedan is the soul species home of the Luciferites. So when we die, we've got a couple of options. Our afterlife could be any one of these that we choose to dwell in. I like to go to the Geffian version of it for that little chalet, but
Arcturian.
Arcturian.
You just said Geffian.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Arcturian. Oh, God. Thanks. Thank you. I'm a little punchy from my anti-allergy Benadryl. But a point I want to make, though, is there is very lovingly one thin beachhead, so to speak, in the Gabrielite kingdom that the Luciferites, the densest form of the Gabrielite kingdom, we as Luciferites tend to go there first upon death. Our heaven, our afterlife is that narrow beach on the most dense edge of the Gabrielites, which we were next to, that we usually go to after death. A lot of us also go to the Urielite beach because that was the one that was adaptively derived between Gabrielites and Luciferites. So we can also go to the Urielite kingdom in between too.
Incidentally, this is why Luciferites are the most at home here than any of the other angel souls, because they don't have, one, they're the densest, and two, they don't have a home elsewhere.
Yes, we. I was one of the heaviest, so I fell all the way to Earth here, along with 144,000 other Luciferic angels. That's in Judaic lore, by the way, in one of their versions of their cosmology. 144,000. I forget what it was in there, but we're the original wandering Jews that way. We're the ones that came to Earth. There may have been more than 144,000. It might just be a decimal point that's way off there, but that 144,000 is part of our numbers originally. So when I come here, which I come here roughly every 300 or 500 years, it's quite. I feel at home in many ways, until I don't. When I get older as a man, I go, well, I don't fit in anywhere here. I don't fit anywhere. There's no job, as we said in an earlier podcast, for me to look for in the want ads. Prophet, wanted.
Metaphysician,
wanted. Yeah, wanting to help redefine the state of human consciousness and put it in perspective to the metamorphosis of divinity down to flesh. How about that?
Yeah, with benefits included.
With benefits. I can see soul species. But
yes.
Last but not least, for those of you out there that, they're all going, I want to be a soul. I want to be one of those 5 angel soul species, because angels have been glorified in cinema and stories, and there's good reason why they're glorified. That's fine. But as we've said before, I will say it again to complete here. You don't want to be an angel soul, I promise you, because it's like coming to Earth, even for us Luciferites who are fairly well acclimated, especially myself. We find ourselves so outnumbered by Terrans and other soul species. We will encounter other Luciferite souls, and we tend to become good friends or mates with them in that way, because we're so fleshy and we're so angelic both. It's quite a crazy thing to try to wrestle in. And every angel soul species, and we now know people in all the 5 angel soul species, from Michaelite, Raphaelite, Gabrielite, Urielite, and Luciferite, we all have different takes on the earth, but we all suffer in resonant ways till we finally come home to ourselves.
Yeah, I was thinking of you yesterday. I was listening to, I sometimes listen to Ben Shapiro. You ever listen to that guy? The conservative Orthodox Jew, conservative Jew anyway. But I was listening to him, and he was talking about how C.S. Lewis predicted our state of society 100 years ago, and he was reading some C.S. Lewis stuff. And I'm pretty sure he's an Orion soul. Would you agree? We haven't talked about this. But, not C.S. Lewis, Ben Shapiro.
Wait! I just got lost. You started having me. I started looking at the soul species of C.S. Lewis.
I don't know that one.
No, he's a Devic Orion himself.
Oh, okay. Well, that would make
C.S.
sense.
Lewis
Yeah.
is, yeah.
Yeah. And Ben Shapiro, I would say, is a pure Orion, not a
Pure
non-Neo-Con.
Orion, yes,
Yeah.
pure Orion,
So
right?
I like Ben Shapiro because he critically thinks, and it's hard to actually listen to someone who doesn't critically think. And he says things I disagree with, and I like to expose myself to alternative points of view. But
Mhm.
it was making me absolutely crazy because he was C.S. Lewis is a genius, you know, he was a
Yes,
brilliant philosopher and really interesting take on Christianity. And Ben
right.
Shapiro was using it and like just it was like every 3 seconds he'd say something that's true, something that's not true, something that's true, something that's not true. And my mind was just deconstructing it as he was talking.
Yes,
And it started to just make me crazy, like, what do I do with this? I can see right through not only how he's misinterpreted what C.S. Lewis, where he got from that, the difference between truth and fiction and that paradigm. And
right.
then I could see Ben Shapiro's misuse of that, misapplication, his own personal distortions in it. And my mind was just spinning faster and faster, just taking it all apart and then just feeling like, what do I do with this ability to see this shit? This is not pleasurable.
No,
And that's what it's like to be a porous soul. To feel
yes,
completely, you can see right through to the truth of a situation and feel
right,
completely powerless to do anything about it. Nobody listens. There's nothing you can do with it except
right.
just cry or rage. Um,
Imagine, and so that's why you said you thought of me, because I would
oh,
have.
I thought 5 times about just calling you up and sharing that with you because I knew you would know exactly what I was talking about. What do you do
Yeah,
with like in real time? You can just see the arguments falling apart before your eyes, and there's just there's no way they could hear it. There's no
no,
way.
you've got to let them unfold their errors till they dead end. Also,
Yeah.
but I have one metaphor, and thank you so much for that bon mot there, because um, to be a Lucifer, especially as old a soul as I am in terms of number of incarnations here, um, think of being called to a jury trial, right? And you're one of 12, and you've got basically 8 out of the 12 are Terrans, and a couple more might be Gethians and Carpathians, and rarely would you find an angel soul in a jury that isn't excused. We tend to get excused a lot. That's the magic of the universe or something. At any rate, imagine you go in and you start to hear the evidence of a murder trial, let's say, and all the circumstance stuff seems obvious to all of the people but you on the jury that the person is guilty of murder. And you see through all of that. You see all the arguments the lawyers are dishonestly making to
Mm.
manipulate the jury to make it verdict go their way. You see through all of the justifications, rationalizations, and the density of people's consciousness that can't see through to that. So, well, yeah, he's guilty, dude. He's guilty. And imagine being the sole juror that sees that the person's innocent, and you can do nothing about it because you're going
Well,
to get.
it's so funny you bring this example once up because once I was on a 3-day jury trial, and it was a contract dispute. And after the all of the stuff was over and it was time for us to I don't know what to deliberate, the jury was deliberating. We just went around really quick, and there was like 4 or 5 people who were out of reality, and it was a
Right,
really obvious case to me. And there were
right.
like 4 or 5 people who were completely out to lunch, and I just made a case for like 3 minutes or 4 minutes about why they were all wrong, and we were done in 15 minutes.
Oh, good for you, Joseph. All
But
right.
if I was the only one, yeah, that would have
Yeah.
been screwed. Yeah,
So this is the world I was born into, being able to
yeah,
see through everything. I mean, again, I can't not deny I'm the inceptor of this paradigm that needs to be tested, not to believe and believed in if you're interested. But I couldn't have come up with this paradigm if I didn't see through everything in the
yeah,
way that I did. And the price you pay for that is something, as we said in earlier podcasts, Ayn Rand used to say, every loneliness is a pinnacle, right?
yeah.
There's some truth to that, not the way she meant it. She was proud of I'm lonely because I'm not like all the second raters, second handers.
I'd
But
say
there's a
every
sorrow.
loneliness is a nadir. It's
Yes,
it's the
in
bottom.
an emotional sense, it's that, right?
Mm,
You don't have a meta to go, oh, I'm glad they won't have me as a member in their club because I wouldn't want to be in their club anyway, right?
But
So
it still hurts.
it hurts, it does. And so the price I paid for this is I'm 71 as of this 42nd podcast, and it's taken me 40 years, you could say, walking in the desert, trying to sort out my life. I'm a renter, never had Bree and I never had homes of our own. The price we paid, we've been here to learn ourselves, teach ourselves something we hadn't learned by our own processes here, and try to help the planet along and leave it a little better place, even if it's just planting new seeds like Edenity is. So I say that innocently without any ego, because you can't have any ego and come up with a domain, or you can't have any healthy aspect of you that has an ego, because your original motive is to give something the world needs. And I think Edenity will be the default paradigm, maybe 1,000 years in the future, maybe a little less. So we're just planting seeds this lifetime, and I stand by them, and I ask people to challenge them. My shadow aspect had ego about it originally, but that's all gotten mostly healed now. So it's this soul species is so juicy and colorful and wonderful. Next time we'll talk more about the characteristics of each, give some examples of it. We'll have some references so we don't have to remember all these things, Joseph. I'll try to have the picture in front of me too. So in that sense, whoever you are out there listening, you are one of these 27 soul species. If you're listening, the likelihood that you're an angel soul is higher.
I was going to say that, yeah.
And so I'm hoping that this makes sense to you and goes, oh, that's why this has happened in my life, or that's why that happened in history. Edenity has an answer. You might not always like it or resonate with it 100%, but there are always some things there to go, oh, I just learned something new. So that's what we're trying to do here, because there's nothing, last point, I promise, there's nothing more personal than your soul species, right? There is nothing more personal. And that's where the chain, the snake swallows its own tail in a positive way. And our essence as a soul species can help us authenticate our local personality, a version of ourselves, by learning about the nature of our soul species.
Amen. All right.
A woman, I'll add to that.
I hate that a woman thing, because that's not the root of the word, and I'm an etymology guy, and
yeah, I know.
It just means truth, not men.
It means truth, right? Not men. I think it's jocular once in a while.
It's jocular, but I just like, with the in a time where people are advocating for people holes instead of manholes, and pregnant people instead of pregnant women, I put my foot down. Damn it.
Hey, have at it. It's your world, pal. And maybe because I know just what you're saying there. Why I'd like to also unpack LGBTQ stuff about letting 5-year-olds or 7-year-olds say what gender they are.
I know.
Despite being completely supportive of all LGBTQ stuff as adults, letting children decide what gender they are. Now, I read something recently where now they have to say on birth certificates, born male.
Oh my God!
Born female.
This is something Ben Shapiro speaks out against. Yeah, quite logically. Yeah, and
so there are pieces of all good things that are not so good, and that's one of the not so good things about LGBTQ orientations. But we'll talk more about that with grace and patience, like we do all the other things. So,
amen.
And passion.
That too. Thank you, listeners. Happy New Year. Tune in next time. We'll be more on soul species. And thank you for listening. Thank you, Stace.
You betcha. Thanks, everyone.
Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. To learn more about Stace Barron and Edenity, please visit edenity.org. To learn more about Joseph Shapiro, visit clearandopen.com. Until next time, we wish you well on your journey.